Shalom, and welcome to Keeping the Shul Lights On, a podcast about the challenges of operating a synagogue, creating a Jewish community and the hard work and efforts of a congregation's executive director and Jewish organizational leadership. Brought to you by Shul Marketing. Concerned your congregation and community are not responding to your Shul marketing? Discover the strategies to connect with them, reach them where they are, and develop the results your leadership is seeking. Here is your host, Howard Walpoff.
Welcome back to Keeping the Shul Lights On. I'm Howard Walpoff, your host. This again is brought to you by shulmarketing.com. And again, we're going to have some great conversation about running a synagogue, what happens within the synagogue so that everything flows smoothly. People are getting information, people are coming to events and activity and services. And the key component to that is the executive director making sure that all these pieces of this big puzzle all fit into place and everything runs smoothly. So today I am excited to have Rivka Campbell from Beth Tikvah in Toronto with us today. And Rivka, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you and learn more about the things you've been doing. You've been at a number of different synagogues, so you have a great outlook on how different ones work and different communities and how they their needs are met within those shuls. So why don't you share with us? Let's get started with why you got involved in the Jewish community in this type of position.
Well, it wasn't intuitive. I actually I worked in the emergency field. So I was an emergency trauma nurse for many, many years. And before that, I did random weird stuff like I was an exercise rider. So nothing really concrete within the community, except for I did volunteer and later worked for a Jewish senior community center. And in that role, it was a taste of doing Jewish communal work. And I was helping seniors work on computers, from everything from turning it on to figuring out how to do software. But I'd hit a crossroads in my life where I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do when I grow up. And I ended up going to Israel. I went to Israel for almost a year. And so while I was in Israel, I thought to myself, when I go back to Toronto, even though I was going back kicking and screaming, when I go back to Toronto, I'm going to give back to the community. And because we all need to eat, that was in a paid format. So then I started just literally looking around for a position. And I was mainly drawn to positions within the synagogue world. So that's actually how I got there. It seems not natural, but it kind of is natural. I can draw parallels between both worlds very easily.
Well, in general, running a synagogue is running a business. So having a job within a business, it's all somewhat the same, even though this is a very broad job as an executive director. And there's a lot of different people that you're interacting with more on a personal basis than whether you're at a desk in the corporate world, not seeing the people you're actually affecting, or in that senior world, even a smaller amount of people that you were hands-on dealing with on a regular basis.
Right. And I also say it was a lot like working in Emerge. Triaging, all that stuff, keeping that straight face when you can't believe the words that you're hearing. So you do the poker face, all of that.
Yes, because you are running live events every day, whether it's a scheduled, here's an event on the calendar at 8:00, make reservations, or services itself, or some levels of interaction in the building. And that is definitely a challenge. You're a concierge in some ways. You are the CEO in many ways, and the chief scheduler in the broadest way. So how do you feel you look at that, and how do you balance it on a daily basis?
It really, some days, like in anybody's position, are better than others. And I think the key is not only really developing the ability to multitask and to prioritize, and also a little bit in some ways not to take I'm not going to say not to take things too seriously, but really weigh the seriousness of each thing. Like, is the fact that we ran out of salad at Kiddush a higher level than something else? Like, you really have to balance it. And part of it too is it's not a solo effort. Even though people may say, oh, the ED and administration is the hub, not necessarily clergy, etc., is the hub because things fan out from that hub and we touch every aspect of the synagogue. It can't be done alone. You don't do it in isolation. So for example, I have like an incredible staff. If they abandoned me, I would have to leave. And that totally makes the difference on a daily basis.
Well, it does because one, you're interacting with people you like and you enjoy, and that's the social aspect of any type of job. But there's so many different responsibilities. There's so many different pieces to what has to happen. If an event is going to happen, having the chair set up the right way, making sure catering is understanding. So having those people who really understand what their role is and just can move on a daily basis in the right direction makes your job a lot easier, and you go into confidence scheduling event by event and week by week.
Yeah, because I know it's going to get done. I am an expert in my field, but I am not meant to be an expert in every aspect of the synagogue. You have experts who are. So I'm not an expert in operations. Of course, I have an overview of how it works and my expectations and what needs to be done, but I'm not the expert in that. And I think, even in the finance aspect of it, I have a controller who is a chartered public accountant and a general accountant. She's the expert. I do have an overall understanding and knowledge. Of course I do. If I have to whip together a budget or have to balance the spreadsheet, yes, I can do it, but I'm not the expert. So having these experts around me is key to the success of this role.
Now, you also have a very different type of expert that you work with on a regular basis, and that really is, well, they are the members of the clergy and the rabbi of the synagogue itself. So, how important is that relationship with the rabbi and making sure the things that you need get done, and the way that the congregants, I guess we'll call it, flow through the process of membership and how that plays out?
It's a huge relationship. People will talk about the three-legged stool. So they'll talk about the president of the congregation and the rabbi and the ED. And yes, that is a huge relationship, but the relationship that maybe I would even put as a bit higher than that three-legged stool is the relationship between the senior rabbi, the clergy, and the ED, because we are both on the ground. And this is what we do. Whereas the president is a key volunteer lay leader position, it's not their day job. This is our day job. And we have to recognize, or I recognize, that synagogues, while they are a key component of the Jewish community, people don't come to synagogues for programming, for activities, they come because of the religious spiritual component. If they were only interested in just events and programs, you can go to a JCC for that. People join synagogues because of that connection to the religious aspect, no matter whether they are or not, that connection to the clergy, knowing that at your simcha, you have a place with clergy. At the time of need, when God forbid you should lose somebody in your family, you have that connection. So it's huge. So our relationship has to be tight because we intersect on things like that. And part of my role is to make sure that our rabbi also looks good.
Yes, the rabbi is the, I guess, public relations focal point of the congregation, whether that's from the outside world or interaction with the members. And they definitely play a role in many different aspects of their lives, not just sitting there giving a sermon
Yeah,
on a Shabbos
100%.
morning. But
If you think about it, people don't, when they're looking for a synagogue to go to, they don't say, oh, I'm thinking of going to Beth Tikvah because I hear that Rivka Campbell is the executive director. They say, I'm going to Beth Tikvah because I hear Rabbi Jared Grover is the rabbi. Let's be real.
true, not to take anything away from the things you do, but
No,
yes.
no, but that's the reality of it. And that is my expectation of it. That is why you should be saying Beth Tikvah is a great place.
Yes, so the community that's built around the rabbis that are there, these are drawing points to being a member of a synagogue and determining what works with you logistically. And there are people like when I moved from New York to Jacksonville, Florida, we moved specifically to be a part of a certain synagogue and found our housing close enough so we can be a walking distance to the synagogue. And people make decisions based on that on a regular basis. But I want to take a quick step back on something that you mentioned with regard to the three-legged stool. Now, there's a longer length of time with the role that the executive director plays and the rabbi plays. There's contracts involved, and those are long-term contracts. But presidents are usually 2-year terms for maybe multiple 2-year terms, and then they move on. You have someone else coming in, and you've been at multiple synagogues. How does that relationship change within each president that comes in, because they obviously are a part of the stool? And I'm sure some of the role that you have at the beginning is training them to have an understanding of what they need to be doing in this role to make sure that you have the stability of your leg and the clergy leg in the process.
Yeah, it can. Absolutely. I sometimes refer to it as the good, the bad, and the ugly, because you don't know who's coming in. Like, you kind of do, because often they come from the board, but every president brings their own thing. Every president brings what they perceive as their role, or more importantly, what they perceive as my role, because that's usually where it gets tricky. And so one of the first things I often end up doing, especially with brand new presidents, is really outlining what my role is, what their role is, how they work together, and how we have to be mindful not to step on each other's toes. And also a recognition of myself and the rabbi, God willing, are the constants here. And, while presidents and boards come and go, we are the constant, and to recognize that. And sometimes it's an easy thing to navigate, but sometimes it's not. And you find that there's triangulation, there's overstepping, there's challenges. And it's really hard, because you also have to recognize that that president, while they may be president for 2 years or whatever their term is, are also a congregant. It can sometimes be a very tricky relationship to navigate.
And there are benefits to those that come with great skill sets and play a role, because there definitely
Absolutely.
is a need for the president to play a large role in the process. But yes, you have an operation to run, and you need to make sure that everything is running the way you feel you need it to the year before that president took office, and the year during, and the year after, so that everything continues to run smoothly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, we all know everything doesn't always run smoothly. I'm sure you've had interesting little fires that you've put out over the course of time. What kind of interesting situations have you had as executive director where you've had to step in and address in the present moment to make sure that things run smoothly?
I think I have a weird example, and I'll give you the normal-ish example
Okay,
first. I think the normal-ish example, which all of us experienced, was the flip to going because of COVID.
sure.
What the added piece for me was November of 2019, I had started in a new synagogue. In the beginning, you're really getting your feet wet. You're getting to know the place. You're basically orienting yourself to the personalities on the staff too. So there was a bit of it was a little chaotic-ish. And then to add to it, I went to Israel. So I started in November. December 31st, I flew to Israel. I came back about 3 weeks later, and there was a little lull for a while, and then COVID hit.
Yes.
So I really wasn't boots on the ground at the synagogue for much, right? Even though I was communicating while I was in Israel, it still is not the same as being there and working. And then I'll never forget, I was just like, what do you mean we're being locked out of the building? And doing that quick pivot, especially within the context of the conservative world, because there was that whole question about using Zoom for Shabbat, which was that few days later. So there was I like to call it the trauma of trying to figure out what to do halakhically, ethically, everything, logistically, and just really pivoting within days, putting the Hebrew school online when I also had kind of a reluctant principal who really didn't want to do that, and kind of forcing it. That was one of the very few times I pulled rank and said, I get that you don't like it. I get that you're uncomfortable, but you need to get, this is actually not an option. So it was one of the few times I pulled and just said, that's it. So pivoting to do that, and the synagogue in the same week was intense, successful, but intense, because you also add in, I was also fairly new to everybody there. And it was like, who is this person who's telling us we have to do the X, Y, and Z? Who is she? So it was interesting and challenging, but we pulled it off. It was a coup. The other one, which I think is probably very unique to me, was being at a board meeting and having to use my emergency nurse skills to perform CPR. I don't think any ED can say they've experienced that. That was super weird.
Well,
and successful.
Thankfully you were there at the moment to resolve that type of an issue.
That was just like, wow, I guess your skills just stay with you and you bring it to every role. So didn't want to, but did it.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad for them. I'm glad for you in that situation. Now in Canada, you had very significant lockdowns. There were different types of lockdowns within different areas in the United States, and they were handled differently. But Canada was really
ridiculous. So, inside voice.
So how long were you out of the building for a long period of time, and how long did it take till services finally came back to the building?
Oh, okay. So what was it? It was March 2020. We went remote that week, whenever, like right after Purim.
Yep.
And there was myself, how many office staff? Maybe 3 office staff. We locked down. I actually went up northern Ontario. So I was 3.5 hours away, and I was up there for 18 to 20 months. I was actually, yeah. I came back when they opened us for a hot minute. Periods when they said, oh, you can go back to your office. Oh, we're locking you down again. I think, and during that time, we did have services, like of the minimum of 10, because we negotiated with the government to be able to at least have a minion. So 10, but it still was very sparse. So services came back in, trying to think when, must have come back, I'm thinking late fall. Yeah, because even high holidays was in person, but really rigid numbers.
In 21.
It was awful. Yeah. I don't think it was in 2020 was completely online. No, 2020, we were allowed to have in-person high holidays, but with very strict limits. So that was, and then we decided to try to have in-person Shabbat services, but they were very restrictive. It wasn't until, even when I left that position, we were a little more open, but it wasn't about being open. It was about people coming back. But it was a long period. You're not wrong. I think Canada was number 2 in the world for the longest lockdown, because we were locked down, like you could not leave.
Yeah, it was. I know the travel issues going back and forth. I think the border was locked up for a long time, and it was definitely an interesting period. I will never forget it was the second day of Rosh Hashanah in 2020 where we had 15 people. I think we had 28 people the first day and 15. It was invite only, and the
Mhm.
people and my teenage boys had aliyot that they'll take decades for them to get again on the high holidays, because we were part of making sure the service was there and we had live stream.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it's part of
It was
that the
very
experience everyone's going to have at this point. But you made a very key point of now trying to bring people back once
right.
everything was officially open again. How challenging was it? How different were your numbers on a Shabbat morning with the amount of people that you had in January of 2020 as opposed to those first weeks, months after officially
Mhm.
reopening?
Well, I'll speak for the synagogue I'm in now, recognizing I wasn't here during that period of 2020, in particular, moving into 2021. But I do understand, I do have a sense, I should say, of the challenges here, because at this synagogue, for example, even for high holidays, there would be 2 services. There'd be, 1,000 people or whatever. And for regular services, there'd be people would say to me, Rivka, there's like 200 people in services, or 300 people, which sounds mind-boggling because that feels so long ago, like so like last generation ago. But we're slowly building it back. So while there may not be 300 people, there's 100, 150. We're getting there. It really, because the key thing for people, it's not just the health and still the nervousness around, am I going to be okay? It's also, I think that a bit of it is habit. We had 2 years of being at home and watching it on the telly, and that's a hard habit to break. People gain that comfort level in just chilling and not having to get dressed and get to a place, right? So there's also breaking that habit, for lack of a better word, and saying, part of being part of a synagogue is not just listening to services, it's also being with your community. It's also seeing people you haven't seen in a while. And one of our events, which I think was kind of there were 2 things I think was a turning point for us. It was Purim last year, and
Okay.
I had just started around that time. So that was my first event, and people came out. People were saying to me they think that there were more people at this Purim than there was post-pandemic Purim. And that speaks volumes. And when people start to come out and recognize that, oh, it is safe. Oh, I am okay. Oh, I can wear a mask or not wear a mask. Nobody's going to judge me. And or they say, oh, it's great that I saw so and so who I haven't seen in 20 months. And I think that momentum of, there's an old commercial, you tell 2 friends and they tell 2 more, and so on and so on. And I think that was starting to happen, because then we had another event where it was packed. I was like, people are feeling more comfortable, but there's a lot of work behind that in building that level of comfort.
There definitely is. All through it, there was levels of comfort of how seating was going to be when services opened up. We had gold bands around the seats that you were allowed to sit in, and everything else you're not allowed to sit in, and vice versa. So that was a process, and that helped make people feel comfortable. But as you open things up more, it's really that warm and welcoming community that's going to have people want to be part of the synagogue events, whether it's services or something of a different nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had to make sure that not only as the executive director, but also at that particular place, um, place and time, also being a new face, I made extra effort to make sure I was there because I cannot speak out of both sides of my mouth. I can't tell you it's okay and it's safe and not show up. So I made sure I showed up.
Now, that brings to a very interesting question of you have a very big schedule to that goes on or on a weekly basis, and there's a lot of activities that go on, and if you're coming to all of them, it really takes away from your free time as a human who
Yes.
has a job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do you address that?
Um, it really is all about balance. So you will not see me being the ED, and thankfully, I know it sounds bad, but thankfully it's not mandated. So I will not be here every Shabbat because I think just like Shabbat is for anybody else, it's my day of rest, my day of renewing myself. And so I will only come to Shabbat services that I personally would like to be at. So for example, Shabbat Shira, I love Shabbat Shira, so I will go to Shabbat Shira. If somebody is receiving a particular honor or has a special birthday and I really like this person, I will come out to. So I pick and choose the Shabbat services I go to because I know when I show up, I am not seen as just somebody coming to Shabbat services. I am seen as the ED, which then means I am working. And I do not like the blurring of that at all.
Yes.
Events and other things, yeah.
It can be very challenging. It could be very, you just want to sit there, but whether someone has a general question or something happens, they've run out of salad for the kiddush. The chiller goes down and the air conditioning is a problem. And you
Yeah,
happen to be there.
it's not fun. But what I will do, what I've learned to do is not take that on. If they do run out of salad, I say, well, why don't you speak to X, Y, and Z? Don't tell me because I'm actually not going to go and make more. So don't tell me. If the AC goes down, well, we have our maintenance guys are here. Let them know. Don't let me know. And I really have to be very firm about the delineation between Shabbat Rivka and ED Rivka.
It's a really good, healthy way to look at it because you really do. These jobs can take over your entire life. You could live at the synagogue if you allow yourself to do that. And if the
Yes,
congregation expects you to do that, that becomes a little bit more challenging as well.
exactly.
But with
Yeah.
everything that you do, what is it that you find the most rewarding to this role?
Oh, there's lots. I mean, it's everything from just making sure that somebody's simcha flowed beautifully to I get joy when I'm able to answer a question and the person is happy or the person feels even if they're not happy, they understand. It's the feeling of somebody. It's really because a lot of it is not tangible. What the joy that I get from this, just when somebody says, thank you, that really helped me. And then you realize that you did help them, even if it's the smallest thing or what seems like the smallest thing has made a huge difference. Because ultimately, I could do, you had said, it's like, it's a business. So I could literally work in a business, any business, but I choose this because I'd like to think I'm benefiting my community and helping my fellow Jews and my mishpacha. It's not just about a job. right? So I have great moments when congregants come in and we talk about nothing. It's like a Seinfeld episode. It's not about, oh, it's not about your donations. It's just sitting there and shooting the what and talking about our lives, right? So there's some satisfaction in that. There's some satisfaction when my staff are happy, when they want to be here. That's pretty big.
That's very big. That is in any situation, but here, I'm sure at some point they realize this is not just any job, that they really are working within and for a community, and they develop relationships that they wouldn't in a similar job in a different setting.
And it's huge. It's huge. The words that you say to somebody in a particular moment can make or break that person's experience, whether it's going through Shiva or a death or a birth or a conversion, anything. The words that you say could make or break that, and could cast a view over what they feel is Judaism, which is kind of huge. It's kind of huge.
It truly is, and it's on the opposite end, the role they play. Like, we have someone on our maintenance staff who's just so warm and friendly every time you're there, and the way she says hello and how she's interacted with people for years and taking care for their events and simchas and just being in the building, that goes a long way. I remember a relationship I had with the custodian in the synagogue that I grew up in, and that goes a long way, and that connect with him on Facebook all these years afterwards.
See?
And it's amazing how those are able to continue throughout a lifetime.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what would be the best way for you to describe the synagogue that you're involved with right now?
Oh, okay. There's the descriptors, large conservative synagogue, North Toronto. But I would say part of what makes it unique is this synagogue seems to have touched the lives of a lot of Torontonians, a lot of Jewish Torontonians, because I come across so many people who in other aspects, whether I'm, working out at JCC and frequently or just wandering around, and when they say, where do you work? And I say, Beth Tikvah. And I can't tell you how many people say, oh, I went there as a kid, or I was married there, or that. And it actually boggles my mind at how many people in Toronto who have had some connection to the synagogue, even if they don't go here anymore. And actually, when they say that, I say, well, why did you come back? Come back. Even between this synagogue and the one I worked at before, there are these ties. And so that's really neat about Beth Tikvah. It's really unique.
And it's in Toronto is such a deep rooted Jewish community for generations. We said before, I have generations of family in Toronto, and they came over probably in the early 1900s when some of my family came to New York, but the rest came to Toronto. I think it was like 9 siblings and 7, and their families went to Toronto. So I've always had a relationship with the city and my relatives there. And one had a kosher appetizing business called Scotty's in the Bathurst area way back when. So, but it's always great to see and hear about wonderful things happening in Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto's a pretty cool, has a pretty cool Jewish community. And you're right, it's very deep. And so even though my synagogue might not be the wealthiest, might not be the largest, I think that it's had a lot of impact in and of itself.
And that's a big statement there. And day to day, you have a lot to do with making sure that happens for your congregation, your community. So, Rivka, I want to thank you so much. This really was a great conversation, and I learned a lot about the things you do and your experience. I'm glad I was able to share that with the audience. So, I guess keep up the good work and keep doing amazing things at your shul. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for joining us as well. And another great example of the work that an executive director does to keep the shul lights on, to make sure the community is getting what they need out of their relationship with the synagogue, and making sure that everything is flowing, whether it's a regular day or coming back from COVID, especially in a community where lockdowns were incredibly detrimental to the timeline of what goes on in a shul on a daily basis. So we really thank Rivka for joining us today, and I ask you to go out, have a great rest of today, and we'll see you next time.